And welcome back to World Talks. I'm Anna Boinska. With me to discuss the tense situation in the Middle East is Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy expert. Good evening, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening, Anaya. Good to see you.
I'm not going to lie, the situation in the Middle East is very much intense. Something is happening there every single day. We just found out that Hamas informed that it has chosen Yahya Sinwar, its top official in Gaza, as the new leader of its political bureau after Haniyeh's death. What can we expect from Sinwar? What do we know about him? Because we know Haniyeh was very much respected in that Hamas circle.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting turn of developments, right? Sinwar to date has been the military chief in the Gaza Strip, conducting operations against Israel, primary architect or one of the primary architects behind October 7th. So the fact that he's now slated to become the political chief of Hamas, I don't know yet if that means he's going to move to Doha or not. Whether Israel lets him get out of the Gaza Strip would be another matter. In terms of getting to Qatar, remains to be seen. But you could read it one of two ways. You could read his elevation to the political chief as a sign of weakness, that things are not going as well as they want to project, or Hamas wants to project in the Gaza Strip, and that they need to figure out a political out, and that Sinwar is the best person to do it as the former, as the military commander of Hamas. Or you could view it as Hamas is trying to make a statement that they continue, that they're going to continue to be extremists in their approach to Israel, and that they intend to wage war at every level now and not hide behind this dual military leadership in the territory of Gaza versus the political leadership in Doha and Qatar. And so that you could see a mirroring of the two. Time will tell which it is, but for me, it's notable and it's significant.
Now, today we found out that Hassan Nasrallah says the group's response to Israeli attacks will be strong and effective. Then we saw Hezbollah drone hit military civilian areas deep in Israel. And then we're getting reports that Israeli aircraft have flown at a low altitude over the Lebanese capital, breaking the sound barrier. Now, in which direction is this heading? I mean, is it just a matter of hours that this will escalate and just go out of control, or are we witnessing it right now?
Right. Yeah, it's $1 million question. It's a fair question. I would just caution everyone to step back and remember that a lot of the activity that we've seen has been going on since October 7th. Israel systematically, from a top-down basis, has been going after not only Hamas leadership, but Hezbollah commanders as well. And we're seeing that continuing. They're taking out wholesale, Fouk Shukur being the most notable one, obviously, being the number 3 head of Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that's kind of business as usual. So too has been Hezbollah shelling and sending drones into Israel since October 7th. And so in terms of an overall uptick yet, we've not seen that. Now, clearly what was happening today that you just alluded to in terms of the Israeli or the IDF flying over Beirut and creating these massive sonic booms with their jets was meant as messaging to Nasrallah during his speech. And it's unique. They've not done that before, in at least this kind of obvious overt manner. And that was to say, be careful. We can even get to you in Beirut. Now, from that standpoint, I'm not sure we can make much of that yet either, in terms of anticipating when action, at a larger scale might break out. But clearly, Israel was sending a message, just as Nasrallah is trying to send a message back to Israel. But again, right now, we're still in that kabuki theater stage where there's a lot of acting going on. But substantively, we've not seen a big uptick yet in terms of kinetic action.
Do you think we'll see it soon?
It's possible. Certainly, that's one thing that the White House is anticipating. Certainly, Biden alluded to that in the Situation Room, that, one set of advisors thinks that it's imminent. We've seen that in terms of NOTAMs, these air warnings that are given to airlines to clear certain airspaces. But there is another school of thought that it may not be as big as some people anticipate. And one of the reasons why behind that is, at this point in time, Russia actually may not be wanting this level of activity to break out to distract from its own war effort in Ukraine. You just had Shoigu visiting Tehran briefly, dangling Su-35 fighter jets for some reason, an unspoken reason to Iran, assuring them that they would also get certain S-400 air defense systems. But there was an announcement that they were basically saying, hey, don't cause or create any more civilian casualties in Israel. And that would be code because they realized that civilian casualties in Israel would probably elicit a much larger Israeli response. So there's a lot of gamesmanship going on here right now. And it's just hard to predict. And I think anyone trying to predict is probably too focused on being first and not letting the events play out, which I think is where we're at. We're simply waiting to see what Iran wants to do.
But to your point, I mean, we have been reporting on the tense situation in the Middle East for a while, so it's not a surprise to us. But we also see that people are being evacuated from the countries that we are talking about. So it is a little bit different than the cases we talked about before.
Right. No, and it's a fair point. It's important to do that. Having lived in those kind of zones, it is imperative to start evacuating citizens, given the unknown, given what could break out. And then certainly there are curveballs. You know, one thing that I would remind viewers of is that you just had the IAEA for the first time reporting that they see weaponization efforts now by Iran in terms of its nuclear program. Before, they've just commented about getting close to weapons grade in terms of enrichment, but now they're seeing a weaponization process. And that in and of itself, we take everything else off the table, take off Hania being assassinated, take off Shukar being assassinated. Israel may decide that it's time to preemptively strike Iran's nuclear reactors. So, I mean, nuclear research facilities and the like. So there's a lot of different things that could set this thing off. And I think it's prudent for countries to be, you know, evacuating their citizens from the area. So it's definitely a powder keg. It's just a question of whether it goes off or not.
Right. Now, while we're talking about the politics and whatnot, you know, in the middle of this, we have hostages still being held by Hamas. What effect does this have? Does this tense situation have on negotiations when it comes to hostages?
The bottom line is it makes it really difficult to see a deal getting done. Clearly, I mean, in terms of Sinwar being appointed the political chief, he now controls the fate of those hostages. He not only controls their physical captivity in terms of being the military chief in the Gaza Strip, but now politically, he's the one that would be approving any negotiation process. And at this point, you know, based on wording and comments and the like, it's difficult to see him entering into agreement unless he views it somehow in the best interest of Hamas to do so. But so far, we're just not seeing that. And I'm not sure Israel, you know, despite what they may be saying publicly, is ready to step back from continuing its assault on Hamas, on Hezbollah, and potentially Iran's nuclear program if they need to. So unfortunately, from a humanitarian standpoint, I think this hostage deal, at least in the interim period, is probably going to be something very difficult to achieve.
Well, that's really unfortunate. Now, with Iraq being a rare ally of both the U.S. and Iran, how might the Iraqi government's action influence the broader conflict?
You know, it's a fair question. I'm not sure they have that much influence, though, on the situation. I really think this comes down to where, you know, the key factors between the U.S. and Iran really are going to relate to what Iran wants to see out of this and what they might hope to get from the U.S. in terms of negotiated settlement. I'm skeptical of that. I think Iran plays that game. It plays along the Western countries that it's willing to be bought off in terms of its nuclear program. Personally, I don't think that's the case. But, you know, they may be sitting back and their calculus may be, with or without respect to Iraq, their calculus may be that, hey, if the polls are right, if Kamala Harris is surging ahead and they're looking for more of the same from Washington in terms of more conciliatory approach by Washington to Tehran, then they may just choose to sit and wait, right, for the election to play out. But in terms of Iraq itself, to answer your question, I really don't see them playing any significant role one way or the other. I just don't think they have that kind of influence with the U.S. or with Iran.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you assess Israel's readiness when it comes to multi-front war with Iran and its proxies? I mean, do you think how they will handle this? Are they able to?
Yeah, fair question. And yes, they can handle it. I think ideally, you know, if you got inside the heads of the IDF, they would have preferred to have dealt with Hamas first, Hezbollah second, and then ultimately Iran's nuclear program if need be. However, they have the ability to do all three. That doesn't mean it would be easy. That doesn't mean it would be lightning fast. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't take a great deal of time. It would take all of those things in order for them to pull it off. But it's a scenario that they've long planned for. They've seen this encirclement of them, not just of the ones that most Americans or viewers in Poland know of, Hamas and Hezbollah. There's 17 other IRGC-backed militias that are operating against Israel in and around the region, including the Houthis, the PIG, and the like. And so, from that standpoint, I think what Israel's ready to do it. Do they want to have to do it that way? Probably not.
And what about the United States? Because we know the United States is Israel's ally, but when it comes to the Hamas, the war with Hamas, they're pretty much skeptical. I mean, they're saying, yes, U.S. should secure itself and defend itself, but when it comes to Gaza, etc., we know their stand. Is the United States going to have a big impact? Can we even talk about peace talks or a ceasefire and even stopping the whole situation?
Right. And, certainly this White House wants to see that happen. I mean, their preference is to get to a ceasefire, to get to a hostage negotiation deal. Clearly, there's 7 Americans still, we don't know if they're alive or dead, being held by Hamas, and they want to see that happen. I mean, the White House has also made it clear that they don't want to see this escalate into a wider regional war. So from that standpoint, I think they'll do more of the same. Basically, they'll defend Israel, but they're not going to be supportive of Israel going on the offensive in terms of taking the fight to Iran, at least not at this point in time, unless there's some kind of agreement that a game-changing situation has occurred with respect to Iran's nuclear program, because Biden is on record of saying that he's not going to allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And obviously, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is also on record in saying that Israel's not going to allow that to happen either.
Now, as we're anticipating, unfortunately, the worst, the situation might escalate. My final question for you, what might be the impact of the Middle East war on Central Eastern Europe?
It's the perfect question, because I've long argued that they're connected. Ukraine is connected to what's happening in the Middle East, as is the Middle East now connected to what's happening in Ukraine. And that all began, that close symbiotic, unfortunate relationship began on October 7th, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when Putin used October 7th, aided and abetted Iran and Hamas to pull that off, something that I've written with my writing colleague, Colonel John Sweet, in The Hill, calling it Putin's fingerprints. We're all over it. That process started. And then this coalescing of a partnership between Iran and Putin oversupplying him in Ukraine. And so the outcome of what ultimately happens with Iran is key to what's going to happen in Central Europe. Seeing Iran defeated, or at least checked or mitigated, I think only helps Eastern Europe's security get better. The more that Iran can be taken out of that equation, out of supplying drones, et cetera, to Putin's army in Ukraine, the safer and better in the long term that Eastern Europe is going to be. So the two go hand in hand, and it's something that I would encourage all your Polish viewers and other viewers in Eastern Europe to watch closely, because they really, really are related.
Well, we'll see how the situation will develop. Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy expert, was my guest. Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Anaya. Good to see you again.
Thank you. And thank you for watching World Talks. Stay with us for more news and comments.